In today's video, I will rank zombies across 6 major time periods, from the Stone Age all the way to our modern mess, and figure out where you'd actually have a shot at not becoming one of the living dead. And it's not just about weapons or medicine, so buckle up, because we're taking a time-traveling tour through every major era of human civilization to see exactly how screwed you'd be when the dead start walking. Stone Age. Let's start with the era everyone writes off immediately, and they're wrong. The Stone Age dumps you into a world with zero medicine, zero infrastructure, and weapons that are basically fancy rocks tied to sticks, which sounds terrible until you realize that might actually save your life. Everyone assumes this era would be an instant game over because you're fighting reanimated corpses with tools that Neanderthals would call primitive, but the math gets weird when you factor in just how empty the world was back then. Imagine you're a nomadic hunter-gatherer, maybe 40 people in your band, wandering across landscapes where you might not see another human group for weeks or months. A zombie outbreak starts somewhere, turns away a few people, and then what? The horde shambles off into the wilderness and dies of exposure before finding more victims because humans are spread so thin that zombie transmission rates tank harder than your crypto portfolio. The undead might moan and stumble around for a bit, but without dense populations to chew through, they're basically doomed to wander until they rot into mulch or some saber-toothed tiger decides they look like a weird snack. Your ancestors were already living in survival mode every single day, constantly moving, constantly alert. And if a few dead relatives start acting funky, you've got the whole tribe to help bash their skulls in with rocks before anyone gets bit. It's brutal, it's horrible, but it's also way more contained than later eras. But before you go full caveman fantasy, here's the catch. You've got no antibiotics, so many injuries would likely leave you dead, or rotting from sepsis before you turn into a zombie. You've got no long-range weapons worth mentioning since zombies are likely tanking any arrows that hit them, so every fight is up close and personal. All blood and hoping your rock connects with skull before teeth connect with flesh. Any disease that mimics zombie symptoms like rabies or some prehistoric fungal infection we've never even heard of would spread panic through tribes who'd interpret it as evil spirits or curses, leading to stupid decisions like ritual sacrifices that just spread the infection faster. And if winter comes, forget it. You're choosing between freezing to death in the open or huddling in caves where one zombie could wipe out your entire group overnight while you sleep. You've got maybe 40% survival odds here, which is weirdly better than several later eras on this list. Low population density is your ultimate shield. Nomadic lifestyle means you're not trapped anywhere when things go south, and the lack of global trade routes means an outbreak in one valley doesn't become an outbreak everywhere. You're surviving despite having the worst gear and zero medical knowledge, purely because there aren't enough humans bunched together to create the cascading horde effect that makes zombies truly apocalyptic. But humans invented cities, and that made things much deadlier. Bronze Age, cities. That's what kills you here. The Bronze Age gives you actual metal weapons, writing, organized armies, and cities with thousands of people crammed inside mud brick walls, which sounds like an upgrade until you realize you've just built the perfect zombie breeding ground. You're in ancient Ur or Thebes, surrounded by thousands of neighbors in a city that's essentially one giant disease incubator even on a good day. Sanitation is throw it in the street and hope. Everyone's drinking from the same contaminated water source, and personal space is a concept that won't be invented for another 3,000 years. A zombie outbreak starts at the market, maybe from some trader who got bitten in a neighboring region, and within hours you've got chaos in the narrow streets, as the infected multiply faster than a pyramid scheme. Bronze swords and spears are definitely better than rocks. Sure, but have you ever tried to decapitate something with a bronze blade? That metal's soft, it bends and dulls, and you're going to spend more time sharpening your weapon than actually using it effectively against enemies who don't care that you nicked them. Infrastructure failure kills you faster than the zombies. Ancient cities depended on constant food shipments from the countryside, regular water management, and trade networks that could span hundreds of miles. The second panic hits and people start barricading themselves indoors or fleeing into the desert. All those systems collapse like a house of cards in a hurricane. No food coming in means starvation within weeks. No water management means disease outbreaks that make zombies look tame. And no organized defense means the military either abandons the city to save themselves or gets overrun trying to hold choke points with weapons that can't efficiently kill the undead. You've also got the religious angle. Priests would interpret this as divine punishment and either demand sacrifices that spread the infection or convince the population to welcome death as atonement, both options being spectacularly stupid but very on brand for ancient crisis management. And good luck escaping, because you're surrounded by either desert, river valleys that are just as populated and doomed, or hostile neighboring kingdoms who'll kill you on sight for being a disease refugee. The survival math here is grim. Maybe 35% make it, and only if you're lucky enough to be a nomadic group on the outskirts when everything implodes. cities become tombs within days, the organized armies can't adapt to enemies who don't follow war conventions, and the interconnected trade routes that made civilization possible become highways for zombie spread. You've got better weapons than the Stone Age, but way worse positioning, because you've concentrated humanity into easily overrun targets, while developing just enough long-distance contact to ensure outbreaks don't stay local. It's like we learned all the wrong lessons from surviving the wilderness and decided that packing everyone together with minimal medicine was the smart move. Congratulations, you've invented urbanism, and it's going to get you killed in the most ironic way possible. But what if you had better weapons? What if empires could coordinate responses across hundreds of miles? Hold that thought. Iron Age, this is where things should get better. Iron swords, professional armies, Roman engineering. Finally, humanity has the tools to win. Except connectivity is about to kill everyone. You're balancing genuinely better survival tools against the fact that Rome, Persia, and Han China just connected half the planet with roads, armies, and trade routes that'll spread infection faster than fake news on social media. Iron swords actually hold an edge, armor gets serious, and military tactics evolve into something resembling competence. But you're also living in an era where a single zombie getting on a merchant ship can turn 3 continents into a feeding frenzy. You're a Roman citizen in some provincial town, maybe in Gaul or Britannia, when reports start filtering in about a plague that makes the dead walk. The legions march out to investigate, following their standard playbook of overwhelming force and disciplined formations, and promptly discover that zombies don't break rank when you throw pila at them. Iron gladi are genuinely effective at decapitation and limb removal. Sure, but you need training and strength to use them right, and most of your fellow citizens are farmers who've never held a sword in their lives. The military's impressive until it isn't. Legionaries can hold a shield wall and methodically kill shamblers for hours, creating literal walls of corpses, but eventually fatigue sets in. Someone gets careless, and suddenly you've got infected soldiers turning behind the lines and collapsing the entire formation from within. It's the Battle of Cannae, but worse, because the enemy doesn't need supply lines or morale. Those impressive Roman roads, zombie highways, those incredible Roman roads that made empire building possible, they're now zombie highways, spreading the infection from Britain to Egypt faster than anyone can quarantine it. Aqueducts mean cities have reliable water, which is great until the aqueduct workers die and nobody maintains them, leaving you with stagnant plague pools. The famous all roads lead to Rome system means all zombies lead to Rome too, and once the capital falls, the psychological impact radiates through the empire like a shockwave. If Rome can die, anywhere can die, and suddenly frontier garrisons are abandoning posts and fleeing into the wilderness. You've got hill forts and walled cities that seem defensible until you factor in siege dynamics. Romans could last months under siege with preparation, but zombies don't need to eat or sleep. They'll just mill around your walls until disease, starvation, or internal panic makes your city tear itself apart from within. And let's not forget the class warfare. When food runs out, the patricians are not sharing with the plebs, which means civil violence kills people faster than zombies do, creating more infected and accelerating the collapse. Your survival odds here hover around 45%, and that's generous. You've got the best weapons yet seen by humanity and the organizational skills to actually coordinate responses across hundreds of miles, but you've also got the connectivity to make local outbreaks into global catastrophes. If you're savvy and lucky, you can flee to some remote island like Hadrian's Wall country or the Scottish Highlands, places where Roman control was always sketchy and zombie spread would be naturally limited by geography. But for the average city dweller, you're watching civilization's greatest achievement to date become its own coffin, because we built all these systems assuming our enemies would be human. Zombies don't care about your diplomatic treaties or your impressive siege engines. They just keep coming, and eventually even iron swords get tired. So far, every advancement makes things worse. Cities cluster humans into feeding zones. Roads spread infection. Empires create cascading collapse, which means the Middle Ages with castles and knights should finally give us defensible positions, right? Medieval Age. Castles look perfect for zombie defense. Thick walls, moats, elevated positions, everyone's fantasy fortress. And it's a trap. You're not defending against zombies. You're locking yourself in a stone coffin. Dense rural populations that can't escape easily. Feudal systems that'll collapse into every man for himself chaos. And just enough military organization to make last stands dramatic, but ultimately futile. Plus, hey, you've already survived one massive plague, recently the Black Death, so everyone's paranoid and traumatized even before zombies show up. You're a peasant in some European village around 1350. You've just watched half your neighbors die from plague, you're borderline starving because crops failed again. And now there are reports that that the dead from the mass graves are digging themselves out and stumbling into town looking for dinner. Your local lord has a castle with thick walls and a moat, which sounds perfect until you realize that once you're inside, you're stuck there. Medieval sieges were won by starvation, and zombies are way better at waiting than Mongol armies ever were. You've got actual metal armor now, which theoretically protects you from bites. Except armor has gaps at the joints, it's exhaustingly heavy, and most importantly, only knights can afford it. You're wearing wool and leather if you're lucky. Basically the medieval equivalent of wearing pajamas to a knife fight. Swords and maces work great for skull crushing, but you need training, and 90% of the population are farmers who've never killed anything bigger than a chicken. The feudal system dooms you faster than the zombies do, because it's built entirely on rigid hierarchy and loyalty chains that disintegrate under pressure. Your lord's supposed to protect you in exchange for taxes and labor, but when zombies show up, he's barricading himself in the castle with his family and guards, leaving you and the other peasants to figure it out. Maybe you get lucky and he lets some villagers inside, but now you've got hundreds of people sharing food stores meant for 50. And within weeks, someone's going to crack open the gates to relieve pressure and doom everyone when infected refugees flood in. Churches become focal points of disaster because religious leaders interpret this as end times and either encourage mass prayer gatherings that spread infection or declare the zombies are God's punishment, leading to witch burnings and scapegoating that kill more people than the actual undead. And let's talk about psychological warfare. Medieval people believed in demons, revenants, and all sorts of supernatural evil. So seeing corpses walk isn't just terrifying, it's confirmation that hell literally opened up. That kind of existential dread makes people do incredibly stupid things, like trying to exorcise zombies instead of decapitating them. You're looking at maybe 30% survival odds, if you're optimistic, and that's only if you're positioned in some remote monastery or isolated manor with good walls and a year's food supply already stocked. Cities are catastrophic. Narrow streets become choke points where the living get trapped and devoured. Guild systems collapse as craftsmen abandon posts, and the urban poor turn to cannibalism within weeks because nobody planned for this. Rural villages fare slightly better because you can flee into forests, but without wilderness survival skills, which most medieval peasants don't have. You're just dying slower in the woods. The irony is that medieval Europe had all the tools to theoretically survive: stone fortifications, metalworking, organized military forces, and a population hardened by constant hardship. But the social systems were so rigid and the medical knowledge so absent that the response would be catastrophically incompetent, probably making the outbreak worse through panic and superstition. You'd think after barely surviving the Black Death, people would have learned about quarantine and disease spread, but apparently getting 50% of Europe killed isn't enough of a lesson when zombies start breaking down doors. Notice the pattern? Every era I've shown you has better technology than the last, and worse survival odds. There's one factor that matters more than weapons or walls, and it's been killing us since the Bronze Age. But first, let's talk about the era that invented zombie mythology, early modern era. Now we're in the Renaissance through the Victorian Age, and things are getting weird in the best and worst ways. This era ranks 5th because you've finally got firearms, global communication networks, and the Industrial Revolution's early infrastructure. But you've also got colonialism spreading diseases worldwide, cities packed tighter than sardine cans, and the birth of the zombie concept itself emerging from Haitian voodoo and slavery atrocities. You've got better tools for survival than any previous era, but also way more ways for an outbreak to go global before anyone figures out what's happening. Let's set the scene in 2 wildly different environments, because this era spans enough time for things to change dramatically. First, we're in 1791 Haiti during the Revolution, where zombie legends actually originate from brutal slavery conditions and possible cases of people being drugged into death-like states. If a real outbreak happened here, you've got plantations full of desperate people, colonial powers fighting over territory, and tropical diseases already killing everyone who wasn't born with immunity. Machetes and muskets are your weapons, which is actually a decent combo. Machetes never run out of ammo, and muskets can drop a zombie from distance, but reload speeds are glacially slow and black powder gets wet in tropical humidity, leaving you with expensive clubs. Plantations become death zones because they're designed to concentrate enslaved populations, making infection spread instantaneous, and the European colonial forces would absolutely prioritize fleeing back to ships over trying to contain anything, spreading zombies across the Atlantic before anyone realizes what's happening. Now jump forward to 1885 London, peak Victorian era, and you've got gas lamps, police forces, newspapers, and enough industrial pollution to give zombies a distinctive cough. Cities are massively overcrowded. We're talking tenement buildings where 50 people share one toilet. And sanitation is improved, only in the sense that sometimes sewage goes into underground pipes instead of directly into the Thames. An outbreak starts in the East End slums, spreads through the rookeries faster than Jack the Ripper's legend, and suddenly you've got thousands of zombies shambling through fog-choked streets while the wealthy evacuate to countryside estates and leave the poor to die. Guns are much better now. Revolvers, rifles, even early machine guns. But ammunition is still expensive and limited, and most civilians don't own firearms. Victorian society's rigid class structure means information flows slowly from lower to upper classes. So by the time Parliament acknowledges the problem, half of London's already infected. On the plus side, Britain's an island, so naval blockades could theoretically contain the outbreak to the British Isles, which is great for the rest of the world, but not super comforting if you're British. Survival odds jump to about 50% in this era, but it's wildly variable based on location and timing. If you're in a remote colonial outpost, you might never see a zombie because geography saves you. If you're in a major port city when outbreak hits, you're probably doomed because those cities are choke points of humanity with escape routes that all involve cramming onto ships that'll just carry infection elsewhere. The medical knowledge is just advanced enough to recognize contagion and maybe attempt quarantine, but nowhere near understanding viruses or developing treatments, so you're stuck with shoot the infected as your only option. The printing press means information spreads faster than in medieval times. Newspapers can warn people within hours, but it also means misinformation and panic spread just as fast, with tabloids publishing insane theories about divine punishment or chemical weapons that make the crisis worse. And let's not forget the psychological aspect. Victorian society is obsessed with death, spiritualism, and the occult, so zombie outbreaks would fit perfectly into existing anxieties about the boundary between life and death, probably leading to weird seance-based solutions that accomplish nothing except getting more people killed. So what's the mystery factor I mentioned? The thing that trumps weapons and medicine: dependency. The more complex your civilization, the more fragile it becomes. Which brings us to the era with the most tools and the most ways to fail. Present day. Modern day should be an easy win. We have assault rifles, helicopters, military drones, real-time global communication, and we've literally planned for this scenario. But here's the uncomfortable truth. We'd fail faster than any previous era. Not because we lack tools, because we can't function without electricity for 72 hours. The ranking isn't about who survives. It's about who survives their own civilization collapsing. We've got more survival tools than any previous civilization, better medicine than ancient Romans could dream of, and weapons that can drop targets from 1,000 yards, and we'd still turn into a zombie buffet within weeks, because our entire society is built on infrastructure so fragile that one good push turns us into helpless idiots. Let's walk through how this plays out in real time, because it's been gamed out in countless movies, shows, and even actual military planning documents like Conplan 8.88. Outbreak starts somewhere. Let's say a major city. Doesn't matter which one, because they're all equally screwed. And within hours, social media is flooded with shaky phone footage of people eating each other. Half the internet thinks it's a publicity stunt. The other half is panic buying toilet paper and ammunition. And meanwhile, the infection is doubling every few hours because modern cities pack millions of people into spaces where you're literally touching strangers on subway cars. Emergency services respond, police try to contain the chaos, but they're trained for human threats who care about getting shot, not infected hordes who shamble through bullets until you land a headshot. Hospitals overflow immediately because everyone who gets bit rushes there for treatment, turning medical centers into zombie factories that spread infection to doctors, nurses, and patients who came in for completely unrelated reasons. Now here's where it gets really stupid. Our entire modern lifestyle is built on assuming infrastructure works. Electricity, water, food supply, internet, all of it requires constant maintenance by specialized workers who are currently being eaten or fleeing for their lives. Power plants shut down within 72 hours when workers don't show up, plunging cities into darkness and shutting down everything from water pumps to hospital equipment. Grocery stores get looted within the first day, because just-in-time delivery means there's only about 3 days of food on shelves at any given moment, and panic buying accelerates that to hours. Gas stations run dry as everyone tries to evacuate simultaneously, creating traffic jams that turn highways into parking lots where people get trapped and picked off. The internet goes down in sections as server farms lose power, cutting off communication exactly when people need it most. And the military? They're impressive for about a week, then fall apart as soldiers realize their families are in danger and start deserting to protect loved ones. ones, leaving billion-dollar equipment unmanned. Here's the brutal math that makes the modern era both the best and worst time for a zombie outbreak. We've got 60% theoretical survival odds if everyone behaves rationally, follows protocol, and works together using our incredible technology. But we're humans, so actual survival odds are maybe 50% at best. Because people are predictably irrational nightmare generators who will turn every advantage into a disadvantage through sheer stubbornness and selfishness. You've got preppers who saw this coming and are actually prepared, sure, but you've also got millions of people who can't survive 3 days without DoorDash and think bugging out means logging off social media. Zombie fiction has trained people in theory, but also given them wildly unrealistic expectations. No, you're not going to headshot zombies from a moving car. And no, your local mall is not a sustainable fortress. The gun culture in some countries means civilians are armed, which helps until you realize most gun owners can't hit a moving target under pressure and will waste ammunition panic firing into crowds. Urban density means cities die fast, but also means survivors are concentrated in suburbs and rural areas, creating little pockets of humanity that might actually make it. Psychological warfare is what really kills us in this era, though. Modern people are so divorced from violence and death that seeing zombies would break most minds instantly. We're used to horror being on screens, safely contained, not actively trying to eat us in 4K clarity. Decision paralysis sets in as people wait for authorities to save them, not realizing authorities are just as screwed. Social media becomes a weapon. Viral misinformation convinces people to gather in safe zones that become slaughterhouses. Conspiracy theories claim it's all a government hoax right up until theorists get bitten, and influencers try to monetize the apocalypse until their phones die. And let's not even start on how international response would fail. Countries would close borders, maybe nuke outbreak zones, and definitely leave each other to die while pretending it's about containment. The same globalization that made modern life comfortable means an outbreak anywhere becomes an outbreak everywhere, because you've got same-day international flights carrying infected passengers to every continent before anyone realizes something's wrong. But here's the thing that makes this era actually survivable if you're smart and lucky. We know it's coming. Zombie fiction has been our playbook. Disaster preparedness exists, and enough people have thought about this seriously that communities could theoretically organize. You've got rural areas with sustainable agriculture, medical knowledge that could develop treatments if given time, and pockets of military prepper types who are genuinely ready. The technology exists to win drones for scouting, radios for coordination, vehicles for mobility. It's just a question of whether enough people use it correctly before society collapses completely. And that's the bitterest pill. We'd lose not because zombies are unbeatable, but because we're too dependent on systems that fail the moment they're stressed, and too divided as a species to cooperate when survival requires it. If you somehow enjoyed watching humanity implode across 6 different eras, click the video on screen to see the craziest real-life zombie experiments you've never heard of.